You can eat whatever the dog doesn't finish." The words landed clean, almost casual, like they belonged at the table. Vanessa didn't even look up right away. She kept slicing into her steak, slow and precise, like she'd just said something clever instead of cruel. For a second, no one reacted. Then a few quiet laughs slipped out, tight, uncomfortable, the kind people use when they don't want to be the one who breaks the moment. Silverware paused mid-air. Someone shifted in their chair. I felt my hand stop halfway to my mouth. I knew exactly what it was. It was recognition. This wasn't a joke that went too far. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She meant it. And worse, no one at that table thought it was serious enough to stop. I set my fork down carefully, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to feel the weight of it in my hand before letting it go. This time, I didn't let it go. I reached across the table and took the untouched half of Vanessa's steak straight off her plate. That got her attention. Her knife froze in mid-cut. Ethan looked up sharply, his glass hovering just below his lips. No one spoke. I stood steady enough that it surprised even me and walked to the corner where their golden retriever Max was lying on his bed. He lifted his head as I approached, tail thumping once against the floor. I placed the steak into his bowl. For a beat he just blinked at it, confused. Then he started eating. Loudly. The sound filled the room in a way conversation hadn't for a while. I turned and walked back to my seat, pulling the chair in without a rush, like this was all perfectly normal. "Well," I said, reaching for my water, my voice even, I suppose, "now we'll both find out how much the dog leaves me." A soft, choked laugh slipped from the far end of the table. "Sophie." She covered her mouth quickly, but not before I caught the look in her eyes, sharp, awake, almost relieved. Vanessa's face flushed deep red. "That was a joke," she said, her tone brittle now. "I know," I replied, cutting into my potatoes. "So was mine." That wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. It was just the first time I didn't let it pass. No one said anything. Not really. Under the table, I felt a light pressure against my foot. Sophie. Just a quick squeeze. Intentional. I didn't look at her, but I didn't move away either. That said enough. "My name is Pamela Grant. I'm 62 years old, and I didn't realize how long I'd been letting things like that slide. If you've ever sat through something like that, you probably know how heavy it feels, and I always wonder where people are listening from. Tell me your city if you want." Dinner ended the way these things usually do, quietly, as if nothing worth remembering had happened. I washed my hands at the sink, letting the warm water run longer than necessary. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I could see Ethan loading the dishwasher while Vanessa dried plates beside him. Their movements were sharp, disconnected. They weren't talking. Not really. I dried my hands and returned to the table where my coffee was still waiting. I took my time with it. There was no rush to leave. Not tonight. For years I had made myself easy to move around. Flexible. Available. Quiet when it counted. Tonight I stayed. When I finally stood, Sophie was already in the hallway. She followed me to the coat rack, her expression softer now, but still carrying that same quiet understanding. "That was kind of amazing," she whispered, just low enough that it wouldn't carry. I raised an eyebrow slightly as I slipped my coat on. "Feeding the dog." Her mouth curved. Feeding him her dinner. There it was, again, that spark. Not just amusement. Recognition. Sometimes I thought you have to speak in a language people don't expect. "Grandma," she added, her voice quieter this time, "they shouldn't talk to you like that." I met her eyes for a moment. She was young, but not so young that she didn't see it clearly. "I know," I said. That was all. Ethan walked me to the door, his expression already settling back into something neutral, something easier. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said, like the evening had been uneventful, like nothing had shifted at all. I looked at him a second longer than usual. Then I nodded. "Good night, Ethan." The air outside was cooler than I expected. It caught at my scarf as I stepped off the porch, the quiet of the street wrapping around me in a way the house never had. I walked slowly to my car, the gravel crunching under my shoes. It was strange. All those years of showing up, of helping, of smoothing over moments exactly like that, and this was what it had come down to. A piece of steak, a dog, and a line I hadn't realized I'd been standing on for a very long time. I reached for the car door, pausing for just a second before opening it. Something had already started to shift. And this time, I wasn't going to pretend I didn't feel it. The drive home was quiet in a way that felt different. Not heavy, not hollow, just clear. Streetlights slid across the windshield in slow intervals, and for once I wasn't replaying what I could have said differently. I wasn't softening Vanessa's words in my head, turning them into something easier to accept. I let them stay exactly as they were, sharp, deliberate, honest. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me the way it always did, still familiar, unchanged. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and set my keys down on the small table by the entrance. For a moment, I just stood there. It struck me then how much of my time, my energy, my attention had been tied to that other house, their schedules, their needs, their emergencies. I moved through my own home almost like a guest some days. That thought lingered as I walked into the kitchen and turned on the light. There had been a time when helping them didn't feel like something I had to think about. It felt natural, necessary even. After George passed, the quiet had been unbearable at first. Ethan was still young then, still figuring things out, and stepping into his life, into his needs, had given me something to hold on to. When he married Vanessa, I told myself it would settle into something balanced. Two adults building a life with me somewhere gently on the edges. Instead, I found myself pulled closer. At first it was small things. Babysitting when Sophie was little so they could both work late. Picking up groceries when money felt tight. Covering a bill here and there when something unexpected came up. They were grateful then. At least it sounded like gratitude. "Thank you, Pamela. We don't know what we'd do without you." I didn't question it. I didn't want to. Helping them felt like helping my own life stay full. But gratitude has a way of changing when it's never challenged. Somewhere along the years the tone shifted. The requests came more often. Then they came sooner. Then they stopped sounding like requests at all. "Can you just handle the tuition this month? We're a little short on the mortgage again. It's only temporary." Temporary became familiar. Familiar became expected. I leaned against the kitchen counter, folding my arms lightly as those memories moved through me one after another, clearer now than they had ever been before. The Christmas with the washer and dryer came back first. Their old one had broken right before the holidays, and Vanessa had mentioned it in passing, tight smile, slight sigh, just enough to signal the inconvenience. I bought them a new set the next day, had it delivered and installed before Christmas morning. She read the card once. Good. We needed that. Then she moved on. I told myself it didn't matter. After that, it kept happening. The down payment for their house. I still remember sitting at this very table writing the check. $60,000, enough to turn maybe someday into we're moving in next month. Ethan had hugged me then. Vanessa had smiled, wide, polished, grateful, but even that faded faster than it should have. The house became theirs, and the help that made it possible became invisible. And then it got bigger. Car payments when commissions fell short, school fees that kept increasing. That business course, Vanessa wanted just one investment that could change everything. I said yes. Every time. Not because they demanded it, not at first, because I offered. And once you offer long enough, people stop seeing it as generosity. They start seeing it as part of the system. I exhaled slowly and reached for a glass, filling it with water I didn't really want. It gave my hands something to do. The total of it all had never fully settled in my mind before. I had always looked at each moment on its own. This bill, that emergency, that opportunity. But tonight had done something different. It had pulled all those separate pieces into one picture, and the picture wasn't generous. It was unbalanced. A soft knock at the door broke the thought before it could settle too deeply. I set the glass down and went to answer it. Sophie stood on the porch, her jacket half-zipped hair pulled back in a loose tie. She looked like she had come straight from wherever she'd been, without thinking twice. "I told them I was going to Mia's," she said quickly, stepping inside as I moved aside. I wanted to check on you." I closed the door behind her. "I'm all right." "I know," she said, following me into the kitchen. "That's kind of the point." She pulled out a chair and sat leaning forward, slightly studying me in a way that felt older than her 18 years. "I've been thinking about last night," she said. I gave a small, almost amused breath. "That makes two of us. It wasn't just what she said, Sophie continued. It was how she said it, and how everyone just let it sit there. I nodded once. She wasn't wrong. They don't appreciate you, she said more firmly now. They rely on you. The words landed differently coming from her, not like criticism, like clarity. I've let it become that way, I said quietly. She shook her head. Maybe. But that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. I looked at her, then really looked. There was no hesitation in her expression, no doubt, just a straightforward certainty that felt both simple and difficult at the same time. You're not stuck, she added. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh. It's not always that easy, Sophie. Maybe not, she said, but it's not impossible either. She paused for a second, choosing her words more carefully. Then she said it. You could stop helping them. You could stop helping them. Sophie's words didn't echo. They stayed. She didn't say anything else after that. She didn't need to. The idea sat between us, simple in shape, but heavier than anything else that had been said that night. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I reached for the kettle and filled it more out of habit than intention. The soft click as I set it on the base felt louder than usual in the quiet kitchen. Stopping doesn't just happen, I said after a moment. Sophie didn't argue. She only tilted her head slightly, watching me. Maybe not all at once, she said, but it can start somewhere. There was no pressure in her tone, no urgency, just a quiet certainty that felt strangely steady. We talked for a little while longer, nothing dramatic, nothing heavy. She told me about school, about a friend who had just gotten into a college she'd been hoping for. Ordinary things, grounding things. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. I'm serious, Grandma, she said, her hand resting lightly on the handle. You don't have to keep doing it. I nodded. I know. This time I meant it. After she left, the house settled back into its familiar rhythm. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant sound of a car passing outside then fading. I turned off the kitchen light and made my way down the hallway, pausing briefly at the living room before continuing on. There was a folder in my study. It had been there for years. I didn't open it often, not because I was hiding from it exactly, but because I never had a reason to look at everything all at once. Tonight, that reason was waiting for me. I switched on the desk lamp, the warm light falling across the surface in a quiet circle. The folder sat in the corner, slightly worn at the edges, heavier than it looked. I pulled it toward me. For a second, I just rested my hand on top of it. Then I opened it. The first few pages were familiar bank statements, copies of transfers, neatly organized records I had kept more out of habit than necessity. I had always liked things in order, control even in small ways. I flipped through slowly at first. A tuition payment, another, a transfer labeled temporary support, a car loan assistance. The dates stretched back further than I expected. Years. I turned another page. Mortgage help. Another month. Then another. At the time, each one had made sense. Each one had a reason attached to it, a justification that felt reasonable in the moment. But laid out like this one after another, they told a different story. Not of emergencies, of pattern. I leaned back slightly in my chair, the paper still in my hand. It wasn't the individual numbers that caught me. It was the consistency, the regularity, the quiet assumption that I would always be there to fill whatever gap appeared. I continued turning pages faster now, the business course Vanessa had wanted. $9,000. I remembered the conversation, the way she had framed it not as a request, but as an opportunity, something that would benefit all of us in the long run. I had agreed without hesitation. At the time it felt supportive. Now it felt different. Another page. The down payment, $60,000. The number sat there in clean printed ink. I remembered writing that check, the weight of it in my hand, the way Ethan's voice had sounded when he said thank you, genuine, almost relieved. That moment had been real, but it hadn't lasted. I flipped further. Groceries, utilities, unexpected repairs, small amounts that didn't feel small when they added up, and they had added up. I reached the back of the folder and paused, my fingers resting against the final sheet. There was a summary page I had put together once a long time ago. I hadn't updated it recently. I pulled a pen from the drawer and a blank piece of paper. For the first time, I started adding everything together, line by line, transfer by transfer, year by year. The numbers built slowly at first, then faster. My handwriting tightened as I moved down the page, the totals growing in a way I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. When I finally reached the end, I stopped. I looked at it again. Still the same. Just over $250,000. I didn't turn the page right away. My hand stayed where it was, resting lightly against the paper as if moving it might change the number. It didn't. The ink looked darker under the lamp, the totals sitting there without hesitation, without explanation. I traced the line above it with my eyes, then the one before that. Transfers, dates, notes I had written in my own careful handwriting. Each one had made sense at the time. Each one had a reason. But lined up like this, there was no space between them. No pause, no gap where it had ever truly stopped. Just a steady line stretching further back than I had ever let myself see. I let out a slow breath, but the number didn't soften. It stayed exactly where it was. And that was the first time I stopped thinking about what I'd given and started wondering why it had never stopped. I stared at it for a long moment, not in disbelief, in recognition. That wasn't one decision. That wasn't one moment of generosity. I hadn't seen it like that before. I'd been doing it for years. I set the pen down and leaned back, exhaling slowly. It wasn't anger that rose first, something quieter, a kind of clarity that left very little room for excuses. It wasn't just that night. It was about years, years of stepping in, years of smoothing things over, years of making sure nothing ever truly fell apart for them. And in doing that, I had made it unnecessary for them to hold anything up on their own. I didn't reach for anything on the table, not tense, just clear. I closed the folder, carefully aligning the edges before sliding it back into place. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to soften the truth of what I was seeing. I let it stay exactly as it was, clear, simple, uncomfortable, but honest. I stood and turned off the lamp, the room slipping back into shadow as I stepped into the hallway. The house felt quieter than usual. Not empty, just still in a way that didn't demand anything from me. I paused at the bedroom door, my hand resting lightly against the frame. There was a part of me that expected hesitation, doubt, some instinct to slow down, to give it time to think it through again in the morning. But that part didn't come. The decision had already settled. By the time I lay down, the ceiling above me fading into darkness, there was nothing left to weigh, no argument to rehearse, no justification to build, just a next step. Simple, direct, necessary. Tomorrow I would start with the bank. The bank opened at 9. I was there at 8:47. The parking lot was still half empty, the morning air carrying that early quiet that hadn't been interrupted yet. I sat in the car for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, not hesitating, just letting the stillness settle into something steady. Then I stepped out. The glass doors slid open with a soft mechanical hum, and the cool, controlled air inside met me immediately. Everything about the place felt deliberate, clean lines, muted tones, quiet voices. Order. I appreciated that. A young woman at the front desk looked up as I approached. "Good morning. How can we help you today? I need to speak with someone about my accounts," I said. She nodded and picked up the phone, her tone shifting slightly as she spoke into it. A moment later, she gestured toward a seating area. "Angela will be with you shortly." I took a seat near the window, the sunlight just beginning to stretch across the polished floor. People moved in and out at a measured pace, no urgency, no raised voices, just transactions, decisions, routine. A few minutes later, a woman in her mid-40s approached with a professional smile. "Mrs. Grant?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Angela Brooks. Come with me." Her office was small but precise, desk aligned perfectly, documents stacked neatly, a computer screen already awake and waiting. "What can I do for you today?" she asked as we both sat. I didn't ease into it. "I'd like to review all accounts that have shared or authorized access," I said, "and I want that access removed." She blinked once, not in confusion, just in adjustment. then nodded. Of course. Let me pull that up. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The screen reflected faintly in her glasses as she scanned the details. I see there are a few linked accounts, she said. Your son, Ethan Grant, has viewing and transfer permissions on 2 of them. That's correct. And you'd like those permissions revoked? Yes. She glanced up at me briefly as if confirming there wasn't more to it. There wasn't. All right, she said, turning back to the screen. I'll process that now. There was something quietly final about the way she clicked through each step. No drama, no resistance, just a system adjusting to a new instruction. Done. That's been removed, she said. He'll no longer have access to view or transfer funds. I nodded once. Next, I continued. I want to stop all recurring transfers. She paused for a fraction of a second, then resumed typing. All of them. All of them. Her eyes flicked up again just briefly, but she didn't question it. Understood. One by one, the scheduled payments appeared on the screen. Monthly support, mortgage assistance, a standing transfer that had become so routine I hadn't even thought about it in months. Angela selected each one. Canceled, canceled, canceled. The list shortened until there was nothing left to maintain. Those have been discontinued, she said. The room didn't change. The air didn't shift. But something had. I leaned back slightly in my chair, feeling the absence of those obligations more than the actions themselves. Is there anything else, she asked? Yes. I folded my hands lightly in front of me. I'd like to set up a trust. That got her full attention. Of course, she said. Do you have a beneficiary in mind? I do. We spent the next several minutes going over details. Structure, timing, conditions, the kind of practical decisions that required clarity, not emotion. Sophie's name felt steady when I said it out loud. There was no hesitation there either. I'd like the trust to be accessible when she turns 25, I added, with limited access for education expenses before then. Angela nodded, typing quickly. That's a common structure. We can absolutely set that up. We discussed the initial funding amount. The paperwork followed forms, signatures, confirmations. Each page slid across the desk toward me, each signature anchoring the decision more firmly in place. The pen moved easily in my hand. No shaking, no second-guessing. By the time we finished, the folder in front of me was thicker than when I'd arrived, but lighter in a way that mattered. Angela closed it neatly. Everything is in order. The changes will take effect immediately. Thank you, I said. I stood adjusting my coat and she walked me to the door. If you need anything further, don't hesitate to reach out. I will. The bank doors opened again as I stepped outside, the sunlight brighter now, the parking lot filling in. The day had fully begun. For a moment, I just stood there, not waiting, not wondering, just standing in the space between what had been routine and what no longer was. Then I walked back to my car. I had just reached for the door handle when my phone buzzed in my bag. Once, then again, and again. I paused, setting the bag on the passenger seat before pulling the phone out. Ethan. 3 missed calls. A voicemail. Before I could process that, another call came through. Then a message. Where are you? Another. Mom, did something happen with the account? And then, almost immediately, why can't I access it? The phone vibrated again in my hand. This time I let it ring. The phone kept vibrating in my hand. I watched Ethan's name flash across the screen, disappear, then return again a few seconds later. Each call came closer together, less patient than the last. I let it ring. Not out of spite, not even out of anger. I simply didn't pick it up. A voicemail came through, then another. I slid the phone into my bag and closed it. By the time I reached home, the messages had multiplied. I set my keys down, took off my coat, and moved through the house at a steady pace, refusing the instinct to check each notification as it came in. The silence here felt different now, less like something I had to fill, more like something I could stand inside, without explanation. The phone buzzed again on the counter. I turned it face down. A few minutes later, I pressed play on the first voicemail. Mom, hey, call me back, okay? Ethan's voice was tight-controlled, like he was trying to stay calm and not quite succeeding. Something's off with the account. I can't just call me? The next one came quicker. Mom, I don't know what's going on, but the transfer didn't go through. If this is some kind of bank error, we need to fix it today. I paused it before the third one finished. There was no confusion in his voice anymore, just urgency. And beneath that expectation, I set the phone down again. A part of me recognized the rhythm of it. I had heard it before, just in smaller ways, the assumption that I would respond, that I would fix whatever needed fixing. Today, I didn't move to do that. Instead, I walked into the kitchen and filled a glass with water, taking my time as I leaned against the counter. Outside, the light had shifted slightly, the afternoon settling into a quiet stretch that didn't demand anything from me. The doorbell rang. Once, then again sharper this time. I didn't rush. When I opened the door, Vanessa was standing there, her posture tight, her expression already edged with frustration. "We need to talk," she said, stepping forward like the space between us belonged to her. I didn't move aside. "About what I asked?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "About whatever you just did at the bank?" So he had told her. Of course he had. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said evenly. "Don't do that," she snapped, her voice dropping just enough to sound controlled instead of loud. "Ethan can't access the account. The transfer didn't go through. We have bills due this week." There it was. Not concern, not confusion. Logistics. I held her gaze. "Yes, I'm aware." She blinked once, thrown off for a fraction of a second. "Then fix it." The words came out clean, direct, like a simple instruction. For a moment I saw the pattern as clearly as if it had been written out in front of me, not a request, an expectation. I folded my arms lightly. No. The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was enough. Vanessa's expression shifted, surprise first, then disbelief, then something sharper underneath. "No," she repeated. "That's correct." Her laugh was short, almost incredulous. "Pamela, I don't think you understand. The mortgage is due in 4 days. The school payment? I understand exactly," I said, not raising my voice, not interrupting her rhythm, just stepping into it and stopping it cleanly. "And I've decided not to continue covering those expenses." The words felt different, spoken out loud, not heavy, just final. She stared at me for a second, searching for something, hesitation maybe, a sign that this was temporary, emotional, reversible. She didn't find it. "You can't just decide that overnight," she said, her tone tightening. "That's not how this works. It is now." Her jaw set. "We've been relying on that support for years." "Yes," I said. "I know. And you're just going to pull it without warning." I held her gaze steady. "You've had years of support." "That's not the same thing," she snapped. "No," I agreed quietly. "It's not." The shift happened there. Not in volume. Not in movement. In control. For the first time, she didn't have it. Vanessa took a step closer, lowering her voice. "If this is about last night, you're overreacting." I made a joke. Everyone knew it was a joke. I didn't respond immediately. I let the space sit there between us. Then I said, "This isn't about one night." Her eyes flickered just briefly, but she recovered quickly. "Then what is it about?" I considered the question. All the years, all the moments, all the small decisions that had built into something neither of us had named until now. "It's about stopping something that should have ended a long time ago," I said. She stared at me, the frustration now edged with something closer to anger. "You're going to put us in a difficult position," she said. "I believe you'll figure it out," I replied. That seemed to land harder than anything else, because for the first time I wasn't stepping in to solve it. Vanessa's expression hardened. "Ethan is not going to take this well. That's something he'll have to work through, and you're just—" "What done?" she asked. I met her eyes. "With this, yes." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. "This is unbelievable." She turned slightly as if considering walking away, then stopped and looked back at me. "You don't get to just walk away from family like this," she said. I didn't argue with the statement. I just didn't accept it. "I'm not walking away," I said. "I'm stepping back." There was a difference, even if she refused to see it. She opened her mouth again, but I didn't wait for whatever came next. I reached for the door and closed it, firmly, on her words, on her expectations, on everything that had once felt automatic. For a moment I stood there with my hand still on the handle, feeling the quiet on the other side settle back into place. It didn't feel empty. It felt like space. That moment. I'm still not sure how to read it. Was that a fair boundary? Or did I go too far? I'd really like to hear how you see it. I stepped away from the door without looking back. The house stayed quiet for a while after I closed the door. Not tense, not heavy, just settled. I moved back into the kitchen, picking up the glass I had left on the counter. The water was still there untouched. I took a slow sip, more out of habit than thirst, and set it down again. For a moment I considered turning my phone back over. I didn't. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway came not long after. This time, it didn't surprise me. I walked to the window and glanced out. Ethan stepped out of his car quickly, the door closing harder than necessary. He didn't hesitate, didn't check his phone, didn't pause. He came straight to the door. The knock wasn't sharp like Vanessa's. It was firm, measured, but it carried more weight. I opened it before he knocked again. "Mom." His voice was tight, controlled in a way that felt more deliberate than calm. "Ethan." He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, his eyes scanning the room like he was trying to anchor himself to something familiar before speaking again. "What's going on?" he asked. I closed the door behind him. "You tell me." His jaw tightened. "I can't access the account." The transfers stopped. Vanessa said you... He cut himself off, exhaling sharply. "Did you do that?" "Yes." The word landed clean. No hesitation, no explanation attached to it. He stared at me, searching my face the way he used to when he was younger, when he was trying to figure out if something was serious or not. This time, he already knew the answer. "You cut everything off?" he asked. "Yes. All of it. All of it." He let out a short breath, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, you can't just do that without talking to me. I am talking to you now." "That's not the same thing," he said, his voice rising slightly before he caught it. "We've built our budget around that. The mortgage, Sophie's tuition, everything I understand. Then why would you—" He stopped again, the frustration shifting into something more pointed. "Is this about last night?" I held his gaze. "No," I said, "not just last night." He shook his head, pacing a few steps before turning back to me. "Vanessa said you took it the wrong way." "It was a joke, Mom. It wasn't meant to." "I heard what she said," I replied, not raising my voice. "And I understood it." "That's not what I'm saying," he insisted. "You're reacting like this is something bigger than it is. It is bigger than that." He stared at me again, this time with something closer to disbelief. "Then what is it?" For a moment I let the silence sit between us. "Not as avoidance, as space. Do you remember the down payment on your house?" I asked. The shift in the conversation caught him off guard. What he said. $60,000, I continued. "Do you remember that?" His expression changed, confusion, mixing with irritation. "Of course I remember. But what does that have to do with—" "And the tuition payments," I added. "The car. The course Vanessa wanted to take. The monthly transfers." He let out a frustrated breath. "Mom, we've talked about this. You offered to help." "I did. And we've always been grateful for that." I watched him carefully as he said it. Grateful. The word sounded right, but it didn't feel the same. "I'm sure you believe that," I said. His brows drew together. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied, "that somewhere along the way it stopped feeling like help." He shook his head immediately. "That's not true." "Then what is it?" I asked, not pushing, just asking. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It's support, Mom. Family support. That's what people do." "For a time," I said. He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means it's not meant to be permanent." The words landed differently than the others. He looked at me like he was trying to find the version of me that would soften them, adjust them, turn them into something easier to accept. That version wasn't there. "You're putting us in a really difficult position," he said, his tone tightening again. "I understand that." "Then fix it." There it was. Not a request. A return to something familiar. I shook my head once. No. His expression hardened. So that's it. You just decide to stop and we're supposed to figure it out overnight. I believe you can. That's not realistic, he said sharply. Things don't just fall into place because you decide they should. I didn't say they would. Then what are you saying? He asked, frustration now clear in every word. It's not my responsibility anymore. The room went still after that. Not empty, just defined. Ethan looked at me for a long moment, his expression shifting through something I couldn't fully name, frustration, disbelief, maybe even something closer to hurt. You've never said anything like this before, he said finally. I know. So why now? Because I finally see it. The answer stayed unspoken. Instead I said, because it's time. He let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. That's not an explanation. It's the truth. He looked away, then pacing again, his movements sharper now, less controlled. This is going to affect Sophie, he said, turning back to me. Her school? Her plans? Sophie will be all right, I said. You don't know that. I know she's capable. And what about us, he pressed. What about everything we've built? I met his gaze steadily. You'll figure it out. The words settled between us, heavier than anything that had come before. For a moment, it felt like he might say something else, push harder, argue further, try to pull the conversation back into something he could control. But he didn't. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping just slightly. I don't understand this, he said. I know. He nodded once more to himself, then to me, then turned toward the door. Neither does Vanessa. He added, his tone flat now. I'm sure she doesn't. He paused with his hand on the handle, not looking back. This isn't over, he said. No, I replied quietly. It's not. He opened the door and stepped outside, letting it close behind him without another word. I stood where I was for a moment, listening to the sound of his car starting, then pulling away. The house settled again. Only this time it felt different. Not because something had been lost, but because something had finally been set down. The next morning didn't feel different. At least, not at first. The same light came through the kitchen window. The same quiet rhythm moved through the house as I made coffee and set a slice of toast on a plate I didn't really need, but there was a shift beneath it. Not loud, not disruptive, just present. I stepped outside later than usual, the air cooler carrying that familiar stillness of a weekday morning. The neighborhood looked the same: cars pulling out of driveways, someone walking a dog, a distant lawnmower starting up somewhere down the street. Normal. That word used to mean something steady. Now it felt conditional. I made a quick stop at the grocery store, more out of routine than necessity. Inside, the aisles were calm, half-stocked, with a few scattered shoppers moving quietly between shelves. I picked up a few items, taking my time, not rushing the way I sometimes did when I felt like I had somewhere else to be. I didn't anymore. At the checkout, Margaret Ellis stood 2 people ahead of me. She turned slightly, catching sight of me, and her expression shifted almost instantly from neutral to something more alert. Pamela, she said, her voice warm but edged with curiosity. I was just thinking about you. I offered a small smile. That's usually not a good sign. She gave a short laugh, but it didn't quite land. I heard there was some kind of situation last night, or this morning. It's been going around. Of course it had. Things like this always did. Is that what they're calling it? I asked. Margaret hesitated, glancing briefly over her shoulder as if measuring how much she wanted to say out loud. Well, you know how people are. It started with your son, something about the bank, and then Vanessa's sister mentioned. She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. Mentioned what I asked, not pushing, just letting the question sit. That you cut them off, she said, finally lowering her voice. Completely. The words sounded different coming from someone else. Sharper, more defined. And now people are saying you did it suddenly. She added, her tone softer now, that it caught them off guard. I nodded once. I imagine it did. Margaret studied me for a moment, her expression shifting from curiosity to something more measured. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am." She seemed to consider that, then gave a small nod. "Well, if you ever want to talk." "I appreciate that," I said. The line moved forward and she turned back toward the register, but I could feel the weight of the conversation linger, not in what she said, in what she didn't. Outside, as I loaded my groceries into the car, I noticed a familiar car idling near the curb. Denise Harper, Vanessa's sister. She didn't get out, didn't approach, but she watched. When our eyes met briefly through the windshield, she looked away first. That somehow said enough. By the time I drove home, it was clear. People were already talking, not as I had lived it, but as it had been told. I unpacked the groceries, slowly placing each item in its place, letting the quiet of the kitchen settle around me again. It didn't take long before the phone rang. This time, I picked it up. "Hello, Pamela, it's Janet." Her voice came through quickly, not rushed, but carrying that familiar urgency of someone trying to be careful with their words. "I heard what's going on," she said. "I'm sure you did." "I just wanted to check in," she continued. "There's a lot being said. I can imagine." She paused for a moment. "They're framing it like you just pulled everything overnight, like there was no warning." I leaned lightly against the counter. "There was plenty of time. It just wasn't used." Janet let out a quiet breath. "I figured it might be something like that." We talked for a few minutes, nothing dramatic, nothing overly detailed. She didn't press. She didn't try to fix anything. She just listened. That alone felt different from most conversations I had been having lately. After we hung up, I stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand. The pressure wasn't coming from one place. It was spreading. Neighbors, friends, extended family, each one holding a version of the story. Each one deciding quietly or not where they stood, and almost all of them were standing somewhere between concern and judgment, not about what had been said at that table, about what I had done after. I moved into the living room, sitting down slowly, letting that realization settle. This was the part no one talked about, not the decision, the aftermath, the way people adjusted to it, the way they tested it, the way they tried to pull it back into something familiar. I wasn't being asked directly, not yet, but the questions were already forming. Why now? Why like this? Was it too much? Was it fair? I let those questions pass through without answering them, not because I didn't have answers, because I didn't need to defend them. A soft knock at the door pulled me out of the thought. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Sophie stepped inside as soon as I opened it, her expression more serious than it had been the night before. "They're talking about it everywhere," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "I know." She moved further into the room, setting her bag down with a quiet thud. "It's not just my mom, it's her sister, her friends, even some of Dad's cousins." "That makes sense." She looked at me sharply. "No, it doesn't. They're acting like you did something wrong." I held her gaze. That's their perspective. It's not a fair one. Fairness isn't always what people reach for first. She exhaled clearly, frustrated. "They're saying you blindsided them, that you're overreacting." I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't hear her, because I had already heard it in different voices in different forms all day. "They don't know the whole story," she added. "No," I said. "They don't?" Sophie stepped closer, her voice lowering. "They're planning something." That caught my attention. "What kind of something?" "A family meeting," she said. "They've been calling people, trying to get everyone together." And somehow I knew it wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a test. I watched her for a moment, taking in the shift in her tone, not just concern, preparation. When I asked, "Soon," she said. "Maybe this weekend." I nodded once. Of course they were. Because when something changes this much, this quickly, people don't sit with it. They gather, they discuss, they try to bring it back under control. Sophie studied my face carefully. "You don't have to go." I let out a small breath. "Yes," I said. "I do." Because this wasn't just about what I had stopped, it was about what came next. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon. Vanessa's sister offered her house larger, more neutral a place where everyone could gather without the weight of history pressing too obviously against the walls. That at least was the idea. When I arrived, the driveway was already full. Cars lined the curb in both directions, familiar models, familiar colors. People I had known for years, some closely, some only through gatherings like this, holidays, birthdays, the quiet rituals that hold families together, whether they're functioning or not. I stepped out of my car and closed the door gently behind me. No hesitation, just a steady awareness of where I was walking into. Inside, the air felt different immediately. Conversations were already underway, but they softened as I entered, shifting into something more careful, more measured. Eyes turned. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Vanessa stood near the center of the room, her posture straight, her expression composed in a way that looked practiced. Ethan was beside her, quieter, more withdrawn than I expected. Sophie caught my eye from across the room. She gave a small nod, nothing obvious, but enough. I nodded back. Pamela Denise said, stepping forward with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm glad you could make it." "I said I would," I replied. She gestured toward the living room. "Why don't we all sit down?" Chairs were already arranged in a loose circle, the kind of setup meant to suggest conversation, but often used for something closer to intervention. I took a seat without comment. The room settled around me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Denise cleared her throat. "We're all here because there's been some tension, and we thought it would be better to talk things through as a family." A few nods followed. Agreement, or at least the appearance of it. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "We just want to understand what happened," she said, "because from our side, this came out of nowhere." There it was, the version of the story that had been circulating. I didn't interrupt. Ethan shifted in his seat. "Mom, we've relied on your support for years. You know that. We built things around that. And now everything's been cut off without any kind of conversation." I let the silence hold for a moment after he finished. Not to make a point, to make space. "It didn't come out of nowhere," I said. My voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. A few people leaned in slightly, listening more closely now. Vanessa shook her head. "Then where did it come from? Because none of this was ever a problem before." "That's not true," I replied. "It just wasn't addressed." No one said anything. Someone shifted in their chair. Denise stepped in quickly. "Pamela, no one is saying there weren't challenges. Every family has them. But the way this was handled, cutting off financial support overnight, it's created a lot of stress." "I understand that," I said. "Then why not talk to them first?" she pressed. I looked at her steadily. "Because I've been talking for years, just not in ways that were heard." Vanessa let out a sharp breath. "That's not fair. It's accurate." The room quieted again. Someone shifted in their chair. Another person glanced toward Ethan, then back at me. Ethan rubbed his hands together, his voice tightening. "Mom, if there were issues, we could have worked through them. You didn't have to go this far." "I didn't go this far," I said. I stopped something that had already gone too far. That landed. Not loudly, but clearly. Vanessa sat back, her expression hardening. "So this is about control now?" "No," I said. "It's about responsibility." "And you think cutting us off is responsible?" she asked. "I think continuing the way things were would have been irresponsible," I replied. A few murmurs rose around the room, quiet, uncertain. Denise raised a hand slightly, trying to guide the conversation back into something manageable. "Let's take a step back. No one here is questioning your right to make decisions about your own finances, but family support isn't just about money. It's about showing up for each other." "I agree," I said. "Then this doesn't look like showing up," she said carefully. I met her gaze. "It is," I replied. "Just not in the way you're used to." Vanessa's patience finally slipped. "You're putting us in a position where we might lose the house," she said, her voice no longer controlled. "Do you understand that?" "Yes. And you're okay with that?" "I'm okay with you making decisions that match your situation," I said. "That's not an answer." "It is," I replied. Ethan looked between us, his expression strained. "Mom, This is real life. Bills don't just adjust themselves because you've decided to change things. I know, I said. That's why it's important that those bills reflect what you can actually sustain. The words settled heavily, not just on them, on everyone in the room. For the first time, no one spoke immediately after. The conversation had shifted, not into agreement, into recognition. Vanessa crossed her arms, shaking her head. So what, that's it? You just step back and let everything fall apart. I'm not stepping back from you, I said. I'm stepping back from funding your life. The distinction hung in the air, clear, unavoidable. Denise exhaled slowly. Pamela, there has to be some middle ground. There was, I said, for years. And now she asked. Now there's a boundary. The word didn't need explanation. It didn't invite negotiation. Vanessa looked like she was about to say something else, something sharper, more personal, but Ethan reached out slightly, stopping her with a small movement of his hand. He looked at me instead. Are you going to change your mind? He asked. I didn't hesitate. No. That was the clearest answer I had given all afternoon. The room absorbed it. No one rushed to fill the silence that followed, because there was nothing left to argue around. No angle that would soften it. No phrasing that would turn it into something temporary. I stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just done. I think we've said what needs to be said, I added. No one stopped me. Not Denise, not Vanessa, not Ethan. Sophie watched from her seat, her expression steady, her eyes following me as I moved toward the door. As I reached it, I paused, not to reconsider, but to acknowledge the room one last time. Then I stepped outside. The air felt lighter, not because anything had been resolved, but because everything had finally been made clear. The house felt different when I came back, not quieter in the way it had been before, clearer. I set my keys down in the same place as always, slipped off my coat, and moved through the rooms without that familiar sense of something waiting for me elsewhere. No lingering thought of what might be happening at Ethan's house. No mental list of things I needed to check on or follow up. Just my space. The next few days settled into a rhythm I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Mornings started slower. Coffee without interruption. Breakfast that didn't revolve around someone else's schedule. I found myself lingering by the window more often, watching the street instead of moving through it. There was time now. Not empty time. Unclaimed time. I didn't fill it right away. I let it stay open. The phone still rang occasionally, though not with the same urgency as before. Messages came through, some direct, some indirect, all circling the same questions. Are you sure about this? Maybe there's a compromise. They're struggling. I read them when I chose to, responded when it felt necessary. Most of the time I didn't. It wasn't avoidance, it was selection. Sophie stopped by 2 days after the meeting. She didn't knock this time, just stepped in, familiar with the way the door sometimes stayed unlocked during the day. You look different, she said, setting her bag down as she walked into the kitchen. Do I asked, pouring a second cup of coffee. She nodded, studying me for a moment. Yeah, less pulled in every direction. I smiled slightly. That's one way to put it. She leaned against the counter, folding her arms loosely. They're still talking about it. I assumed they would. My mom's been telling everyone you're being stubborn, she added, that you're making a point instead of fixing the situation. I took a slow sip of my coffee before setting the cup down. People tend to see boundaries as problems when they're not used to them, I said. Sophie let out a quiet breath. I don't think they're going to let it go anytime soon. That's all right. She tilted her head slightly. It doesn't bother you, I considered the question. It would have once. The idea of people talking, judging, misunderstanding, it used to sit heavily with me, something I felt the need to correct or smooth over. Now it felt distant. Not in the way it used to, I said. She watched me carefully, then nodded once, as if confirming something she had already begun to see for herself. I'm glad, she said, because you shouldn't have to explain yourself over and over. No, I agreed. I shouldn't. We spent the afternoon together, moving through small, ordinary things, organizing a few drawers, making lunch, talking about her classes, and the plans she was starting to form for the next few years. There was a steadiness to it, not forced, not fragile, just present. Before she left, she paused near the door, her hand resting lightly against the frame. "Whatever happens next," she said, "I'm on your side." I met her eyes. "I know." After she left, the house settled again, but it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had been returned. I made coffee, left it on the counter, forgot about it for a while. Not dramatic, not eventful, but consistent. I found myself doing things I had set aside without realizing it, reading longer than a few pages at a time, taking walks in the late afternoon, letting the quiet stretch without feeling the need to fill it. There were still moments when the past tried to slip back in. A bill I might have covered without thinking. A situation I would have stepped into automatically, each time I noticed it. And each time I let it pass. It wasn't about resisting, it was about choosing. The difference mattered more than I had expected. Late one afternoon, as the light shifted across the living room floor, I sat in my usual chair with a book resting open in my lap. I wasn't reading, just holding the space. There was a soft knock at the door. Not hurried, not insistent. I set the book aside and stood walking toward the front of the house. When I opened it, no one was there. Just a small envelope resting on the mat. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. My name was written across the front in a familiar script. Ethan's. For a moment I stood there, the door still open, the quiet of the street stretching out in front of me. No cars pulling up, no one waiting. Just the letter. I closed the door and walked back inside, holding it a little more carefully than I needed to. At the table, I sat down and placed it in front of me. I didn't open it right away. I traced the edge of the envelope lightly with my finger, feeling the slight ridge where it had been sealed. This wasn't a call, not a message sent in frustration or urgency. This had been written, considered. I reached for it again, turning it over once more before sliding my finger under the flap. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to sound like the conversations we'd had before, and for the first time in a while I found myself willing to listen. I opened the letter slowly. The paper inside was folded once neatly, no rush in it, no pressure in the way it had been written. Just intention. "Mom, I don't think I said anything right the last time we talked." I paused there for a moment, my fingers resting lightly against the page before continuing. "I've been trying to understand what happened. At first I was angry. It felt like everything changed overnight and I didn't know how to deal with that. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it didn't actually happen overnight." I leaned back slightly in my chair, the words settling in a way that felt different from anything he had said before. "You've been there for us for years. I know that. I just don't think I ever really saw how much. Not all at once the way I probably should have. And when it stopped, I reacted like something was taken from me, instead of recognizing how much had already been given." I let out a slow breath, my eyes moving across the lines more carefully now. I'm not going to pretend I understand everything yet, but I do know I handled it wrong, and I'm sorry for that. Not just for what I said, but for how I expected things to just keep working the way they always had. The letter ended simply, "I hope we can talk again. Ethan." I folded the paper back along its crease, not as precisely as it had been before, but carefully enough. I just sat there for a while. Just a quiet sense of something settling. Later that evening, I called him. He picked up on the second ring. "Mom." His voice was softer this time, less guarded. "I got your letter," I said. A brief pause. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I did." Another pause, then a small exhale. "I meant what I said. I know." We didn't rush the conversation. There was no need to fill the space with explanations or defend every past decision. We spoke the way people do when they're not trying to win, just trying to understand. "I'm figuring things out," he admitted at one point. "It's different now." "It will be," I said. "And you're really not going to step back in?" he asked, not accusing this time, just asking. "No," I replied, "not in the way I used to." There was a silence after that, but it didn't carry the same tension as before. "Okay," he said finally. "I think I can work with that." I smiled slightly, though he couldn't see it. "I think you can too." When the call ended, I set the phone down beside me and looked around the room. Nothing had changed, and yet it had. I wasn't the same anymore. Not new either, just a little clearer. I keep thinking about it sometimes. Was setting that boundary the right thing to do? Or did I go too far with my own family? I'd really like to hear your perspective. If this story stayed with you, you can like it, or share it with someone who might need it. And if you want more stories like this, you're always welcome to stay.